Locke is hitting the rift, and it's time we ask the age-old question. Do we crash out at the new champion, or do we accept it? Because I'm a small YouTuber, I can't piss anyone off so I can get subs, so we'll be doing a bit of both. As a quick breakdown, we're going to talk about the good of Locke's design from the player's point and Riot's perspective, then we'll rip it to shreds for the other 9 people, and after that we'll make a couple redesigns for Locke which were quite fun to make. But before we start, let's go over Locke's kit. His passive deals bonus magic damage based on missing health. His Q shoots up to 3 nails that slow and mark enemies. Enemies at 3 marks take bonus damage from his next attack. His W gives him move speed, attack speed, deals damage to him, and gives him gray health for damage taken. At any point he can recast W to heal all the gray health back. His E is a blink that lets you recast into a dash, and both of these could proc the marks we talked about earlier. And his R is an AoE slow that deals magic damage and debuffs enemies inside. Debuffed enemies that get low enough are executed and pulled into his artifact. He can then pick up his artifact to reduce cooldown and increase the execute threshold. Kicking it off with Riot's viewpoint, I want to say his design is actually really good for how they've been moving with the game as of recently. The general feel of the game has been sped up a ton over the years. I don't have any game time data, but we can clearly see the games being sped up with the amount of home guard changes, quicker respawns, faster minion spawning, jungle camp respawning, jungle pets, ability resets, FFing, jungle plants, and mobility. But the main thing I want to talk about is items. Back in the day there was cooldown reduction on a handful of items and you had a maximum of 40%. Contrast that with nowadays where ability haste is on most items, and taking a look at the math, assuming we have a 30-second cooldown ability, before we could get it down to a minimum of 18 seconds with a very specific build. But now you'd be able to get it down to 14 seconds with an average build. With the more cooldown you get, the more abilities you can use, and this segues into another note about the feel of the game. I think that Riot is leaning into a philosophy that pressing buttons feels good. If you're playing a champion, you should use those strengths and fantasies as often as possible, which means pressing buttons. With more cooldown, and in Locke's case, resets, you're able to press your buttons a lot more often, which makes the champion feel stronger, thus enhancing the fantasy of that champion. This leads into agency. Does the player have a fair amount of weight when it comes to deciding the game's outcome? The more abilities you have, the more impact you have because abilities make things happen. The same goes for clearing the jungle faster, spending less time when you're dead, and less time getting to and from the action. The other thing we need to consider is when it comes to agency, what is the outplay potential of the champion? If I'm sitting mid lane and my jungler refuses to gank and my bot lane spoon feeds my laner 3 kills, this feels terrible because I've lost the lane and had no control over it. Locke is looking to be really good at getting back into the game with a scaling execute and 2 forms of mobility that reset. Even if his laner is a 12-0 Mundo with 4,000 health, if Locke can shut them down with ulti, he gets a big shutdown and can make a comeback, which feels awesome. In a similar vein, we can see a trend with fixed scaling. The newest champions that have been released over the past 2 years, aside from Smolder and Aurora, have had passives attached to their ultimate. No matter what happens, they get something extra for hitting level 6. Locke can pick up his ulti for reduced cooldown, Zaheen gets armor pen, Yunara amplifies her abilities based on their rank, Mel executes quicker, and Abessa gets armor pen and lifesteal. This means that even if your lane is garbage, it's much more likely that you hit the power spike Riot wants you to hit by having an extra set of passives on your ultimates. As a side note, there is also skin efficiency, and the TLDR is the more abilities you use, the more particles and animations you see. A skin on Katarina or Locke will be more efficient than a skin on something like a Xerath. Katarina and Locke have much shorter cooldowns and resets compared to Xerath, meaning they will get to see their cool particles much more than Xerath does. And for Riot, that means money. And obviously, if you used the skin more, that means it's money well spent, which is good for them. For Riot and the player, Locke is awesome. Thematically, he's a very cool champion. He'll have good skins because of his resets, and his abilities are powerful and rewarding when used right. He also follows a lot of the current theory that Riot has, and he has a ton of agency in the form of his execute, burst healing, and mobility. But now that we've talked about the good, let's dig into why this design blows for everyone who isn't Locke. First, we'll cover agency. Agency is a very tough thing to balance because in a perfect world, each player has 10% agency, equaling 100% of the agency in the game. The issue is if Locke is too powerful, he'll have more than 10% agency, which means whatever he decides to do will be more impactful than what you do. If Locke is good, it'll feel like a 6v4 because he's smurfing the lobby, but if he's terrible, it'll feel like a 4v6 because he can't make the right decision. Next, let's take a look at what Locke really is. He's a hypermobile assassin. Assassins in League are supposed to have mobility, which he has. However, it is what I would call free mobility. What I mean is that if we look at other assassins like Talon, Yasuo, Kassadin, Katarina, and many more, they all have mobility, but it comes with a condition. Talon has mobility if he's near terrain. Yasuo has mobility if he has enemies nearby. Kassadin has mobility if he has a ton of mana. Katarina has mobility if she has allies or daggers around. Even champions that have more consistent dashes like Riven, Ambessa, Kalista, or Irelia, it's conditional or isn't that strong. Riven has 4 dashes, but they all go a small amount of distance. Ambessa has a bunch of dashes, but she needs to land abilities in order to dash. Kalista dashes literally every attack, but she has slow attack speed. Irelia has a short cooldown dash, but only gets reset if it kills or hits something that she's marked. Just by pressing E, Locke gets a blink that buffers CC without needing to do anything and can recast to dash for free. And to add insult to injury, he can easily dash farther than any of the champions we just mentioned in much less time. And as an extra kick in the face, it's a reset, so if he so much as breathes on an enemy and a teammate kills them, he gets to do it all over again. This transitions into another point about agency from the opposing team. If Locke is 0-20, his ultimate is fixed scaling. Even if he has literally no items, it still executes the same. And the fact that it has a big cast range and a big AoE is absolutely criminal. The reason why executes aren't usually AoE is because executes have tremendous value. However, there are other AoE executes in the game, like Smolder and Asol, but the caveat is that Smolder has to stack for 30 minutes, and in Asol's case, if you get executed by AZ, it's genuinely natural selection. But in both cases we just talked about, both characters need to scale for the execute to be impactful. Locke's execute begins killing at 10% health. I know it's an ultimate, but still, regardless of how well you play, if you so much as touch this thing when it lands, the instant you drop below 10% health, you're donezo. There are other executes like Darius, Shogath, and Pike, and with stat scaling aside, the main difference is they need to be in your face to do so. Locke, despite being an assassin, a class known for getting up in your face, can Kobe this bad boy from halfway across the screen, and as a final kick in the face, with literally every other execute with the exception of Urgot ulti, you have to use it when your target is low health. Locke can use this whenever he pleases, and if you die within 5 seconds, he gets a stack. While this is busted, let's talk about the more problematic ability, his W. While I do praise Riot for not giving him untargetable invisibility with % max health damage scaling with how much Chinese propaganda the player has, I don't think giving him an empowered Rengar W was the right play. Obviously, Rengar is an assassin like Locke, and mobility gap aside, Rengar has to use 4 abilities to get the healing through CC. Locke just has to use 1 ability to get the healing through CC. He does need to press W beforehand, so you do have about a second to kill him before he actually can recast, but even still, assassins are supposed to be countered by CC, and giving Locke an ability that keeps him alive while being used through CC is dastardly. And again, we'll bring it back to agency and roles. If you're a tank or even a support, your job is to CC the assassins so your team can kill them. Sadly, Locke recasts W, and now for doing the right thing, you're punished because Locke is now half health again, and you wasted your stun. But now let's get into the redesigns, which is the really fun part. While I don't have 200 years of experience, I do have some cool ideas. We'll first do a redesign of Locke assuming all the abilities had to stay the same, then we'll go into a full redesign. Kicking it off with keeping everything the same, his passive can actually stay exactly the way it is because it's pretty chill. Q will be slightly changed to hit up to 3 targets, similar to how a Lux Q only hits 2 targets. I think this also fits with his theme of being a demon hunter because you wouldn't hunt multiple demons at once, you'd opt for a one-on-one approach, much like Vayne does. And we let it hit multiple targets to give it some more consistency in lane, and for the opponent, the counterplay early is to just stand behind your minions or frontline. W would stay the same, but you can only get the CC breaking usage after 2.5 seconds of casting. This way, if you use it in the spur of the moment, you don't get the CC break, but if you use it before combat starts, you're rewarded for prediction. E would stay the same, but the blink deals damage, and you need to deal enough damage to the target to unlock E2. This way, Locke can still get his mobility and resets, but he can only do so if he hits the right targets. Tanks scatter him because they build magic resist, and he won't deal enough damage to unlock the dash, and this also incentivizes him to go for people he can kill, because the quicker the takedown happens, the quicker he can dash again. Finally, R would be changed so that the artifact area is increased, and debuffs on hit, but deals no damage and doesn't slow. Any enemy champion inside the area that falls under that 10% health threshold is executed and gives him a stack. On cast, Locke creates an area that follows him that deals damage to enemies around him. It deals bonus damage and slows the debuffed enemies from his ultimate. This way, Locke can still Kobe it from downtown, but doing so isn't going to do a whole lot because it doesn't execute outside of the area. It also incentivizes him to unload everything onto a target inside the area so that they have less chances to leave. And of course, assassins are supposed to unload their entire kit onto a champion and get out. We could see the same theory applied to Smolder and Neferi, where their abilities lose efficiency when not used to fight. Now let's get into a full redesign. I want to keep the fact that he's an AP assassin intact, but remove the red flags we talked about earlier with burst healings through CC and an AoE execute. But I also wanted to add in some of the design flair from 2014 to 2017. His passive will be Nail Magic. Attacks and abilities mark enemies as well as dealing magic damage based on the target's missing health. When a unit gets 5 stacks of Nail Magic, Locke can attack them to remove the stacks and amplify the magic damage based on missing health. This also grants him 1 stack of Enhanced Cast. If Q, W, and E are on cooldown, Enhanced Cast refunds 20% of the total cooldown of Q, W, and E. This way, he has his identity of an AP assassin with an attack finisher, but he still struggles against the higher health pools because he can't abuse the 5 stacks burst as much. Q will become Nail Jail. He throws out a special nail that stops on the first enemy champion hit. That enemy champion is cursed, and if they move outside of the break area, they take a chunk of magic damage and bonus damage from Locke for a short time. The break distance is based on how far Locke is from the target at the time of casting. Enhanced Cast makes it deal damage per second on hit, and if the target leaves the break range, they're slowed and take bonus damage from Locke. This is a really cool way to reward Locke for hitting a long-range skill, because the closer he is, the bigger the break range is. This means it's less likely for the target to suffer those nasty effects, but if Locke hits it from a long range, he's rewarded with a small break range. The bonus damage from Locke also makes him have to commit onto the target it in order to use it fully. The enhanced cast makes it more likely that Locke catches up to them, which is very nice. Locke's W will be Ashen Bomb. He gives himself movement speed for the next 3 seconds, and every unit traveled he stores damage. At the end of the 3 seconds, he deals damage equal to distance traveled plus some AP scaling in an area around him. Enhanced cast makes this ability last 4 seconds and grants him diminishing slow resistance. This lets him catch up to targets or get away without giving him a dash, but this also has the theory from earlier where if he uses it to escape, it loses efficiency. There's also a cool theory where because he doesn't have immediate mobility and is more telegraphed, we can add some more punch into his abilities. Additionally, enhanced cast gives it a higher damage ceiling without directly giving it more damage, which is very cool. The ability is also interesting because slows and stuns directly reduce his damage, and most stuns and slows in the game are on tanks, which again are supposed to counter assassins. His E is Ashen Mastery. He uses a special attack and deals a burst of magic damage that also acts as an auto attack reset. The ability begins charging up, and if casting 0.5 to 1.5 seconds after use, Locke can dash in any direction, attacking all enemy units in the way. But if he casts 1.6 to 2.5 seconds after use, it becomes a blink and attacks all enemy units in a line. Enhanced cast makes it deal more damage and makes the dash be able to be recast 0.0 to 0.4 seconds after use, and blink is 0.5 to 2.5 seconds after use. This way, Locke can still get his movement, but he needs to commit to something by using the first part. In lane, his traits also become more telegraphed because he'll have to use it on a minion before dashing or blinking. Enhanced cast gives it much more safety, as he can essentially blink right after using his E. And of course, the auto attack makes it easier for him to get to 5 stacks, which is nice. Finally, his ultimate will be Death Penalty. He throws the artifact, and all enemy champions hit have a chain on them that slows for up to 3.5 seconds. Locke can walk over these chains to end the slow early, deal a chunk of magic damage, and gives him 1 stack of enhanced cast. This is an interesting ulti where Locke can throw it down to slow but not fully hinder the retaliation because his targets can still target him normally, and no one is disabled. When walking over the chains, he gets a stack of enhanced cast, and as we talked about before, this either gives him some cooldown refund on his abilities or makes his burst stronger. In both cases, he has to walk over the chains in order to get the full use, meaning he's getting close to you, which is what assassins should do. Anyway, I'm done rambling, so feel free to drop your comments down below, but make sure you say something I agree with or I will remove it because I have a giant ego.